How's it going today, guys? Today I'm going to show you how to replace your PCV valve and your your valve cover gasket, which also we will replace the spark plug seals on the valve cover as well. I'm going to be using a Philpro VS50535R valve cover gasket set. I'm a pretty big fan of Philpro. I think they do a good job with gaskets, and but I'm sure there's other manufacturers that do a good job too. So anyways, we'll get started. So to get started, we need to remove all of this stuff from the valve cover. So the PCV valve breather hose just pulls right off. A good prying screwdriver will get these clips released back here to pull these up. So you just kind of stick it in there, separate it out, and it pulls it straight up. Most of these bolts are 10 millimeter, so we'll be disconnecting the coils, and just keep in mind of keeping track of where everything went. Disconnecting the coils, and we'll start unbolting stuff. I'm just gonna unbolt all these little brackets. We'll unbolt the coils. Spark plug coils, that is. And loosen the two spark plug wires. Pull this wire out of this coil, and then pull the coils that are on top of the spark plugs off as well. Get those out of the way. Push this wiring harness back over the bracket to get it out of the way. And push all these other wiring harnesses out of the way. That's pretty much it. Now you just have to unbolt the actual valve cover itself. So I'll just go through and remove all these bolts, and then go from there. I'm gonna remove this valve cover and come back to that. Oh, there's another breather hose right here I forgot about. So that's your valve cover there. All this gasket material needs to be removed. Your surfaces need to be clean and level, and dry all the oil off and everything. And we can go ahead and replace these. So you can use a pair of pliers, just grip just the rubber itself, and it'll pull it right off. Just grab just the rubber, don't grab any metal. Pull it right off. Wipe it down with a good clean cloth. Make sure there's no residue on it, any kind of leftover material or anything, and just seat your new gasket down on top of it. It's as simple as that. We'll do that with all four of them, and we'll clean all the surfaces, get all the old gasket residue and everything and oil off of all the flat surface right here, and then we'll go from there. You want to be super careful that none of this residue gets down in the valve cover upper cylinder head. You want it all to get out, not in, because it can clog stuff up if you get it in there. So make sure you're not dropping any gasket material in there. But once all this edge surface here is good and clean, and you've got the actual valve cover itself clean, which I haven't done yet, then you're good to go. Okay guys, now we're going to put the Philpro gasket in, and can only go in one way, so just spin it around until it matches up to all the different shapes. Obviously you want to check and make sure your gasket's clean before you put it in. And yeah, that's in there. Cool. So now the trick of getting this seated without the gasket coming out of place. I don't really have a trick for that. I just kind of gently, without bumping it into too many things. And you pay attention that the gasket looks seated through the screw holes, if you can see that there. You look through all of them while you're placing it. And get that out of the way. And pull all these hoses out of the way. That's a good thick gasket. And pretty much that's it. That's that on there. Checked all sides, looking through the screw holes, and they're all lining up. And then it all looks tight. No gasket sticking out over the edges anywhere. So just hand thread all 6 screws, either with your hands or with a socket on an extension, but with no ratchet, just to get them started and get them hand tight, and then we'll go through and actually torque them down. After everything's hand tight, and screw stuff in, I mean just barely, just a little tension on it, and get it to, we'll go all the way around, alternating sides, and get it to seat evenly, and then we'll torque it down just a little more. But honestly, these bolts do not need to be torqued very much. It's not the torque or the tightness of the bolt that makes it seal the oil. It's that big thick gasket and clean surfaces that makes it seal. So my suggestion is to tighten it just barely over hand tight, check for oil leaks, and tighten it a little more if you have a little oil leak. But don't overdo it with the tightening. You can destroy the thin metal on the valve cover. You can split the gasket by over tightening it, so just be careful with that. Alright, so now that that's tight, we'll go ahead and start putting stuff back together. So we'll put all these brackets back in and reattach the, make sure you reattach all the brackets, the coils, the wiring harness brackets, and 2 breather hoses, and then we'll go from there. Alright, Alright guys, so I'm going to try and get this PCV valve out. So I'm going to brace the bottom of these pliers with a rag. I'm going to grip these pliers on the neck here to keep it from twisting off or over. And I'm going to put my 9/16 ratchet on it and try to unscrew this. Hopefully I can do it without breaking this neck. That is terrible design. Terrible design. Okay. Jeez. That I am not a fan of this design at all. So for future changing of this thing, I'm going to recommend that you put a little anti-seize on the threads. Just make sure that you get it only on the threads and it doesn't get inside the PCV valve. Hopefully this, next time you change this thing, because this thing is supposed to be changed periodically, hopefully it makes it not so damn hard to change. And you just thread it in there, and we'll tighten it down with the 9/16 again. We'll hand thread it first. I'm a big fan of hand threading as much as you can on things, at least several threads. And we'll tighten it down, and we'll basically just snug it up until it gets slightly hard to turn. Being careful not to damage this elbow again, built onto the valve cover. And that's probably good right there. Of course, once we put everything back together and get it running, we'll check for leaks around the gaskets and around these gaskets, and we'll check for any leaks around here and just make sure everything looks good. For the coils and spark plugs, just push them in there, slide it down on the plug, and then just push it down and you'll feel it pop to seat into place on both those. And the wiring harness back here, remember to pull it over and push the bracket on so it's held in place where it was originally. And we'll put the bolts back in the coils. Put this wire, snap it back into that coil right there, just for storage purposes. And once again, hand tighten everything, and then we'll tighten it down with the socket later. And hook up your pigtails, make sure they click into place real tight. And that's pretty much it. After that, we'll start it up and make sure everything looks good. Okay, got everything buttoned up. Got all the breather hoses on, both of them. PCV valve's been replaced. Coils are on, hooked up. Spark plug wires are on. Wiring harness and the accelerator cable brackets are all hooked up. So I've got the valve cover torqued down, just barely over hand tight. Gonna start this thing up, check for oil leaks, and then if there aren't any, we'll go from there, and we'll keep an eye on it over the next couple weeks. Keep an eye over the oil level via the dipstick here, and just keep a visual around the valve cover for any fresh oil, anything that looks wet. If there is anything, it's possible that we may need to tighten the screws down or bolts down just a hair more to get it to seal a little better. And if the wetness or oil leak persists, you'll probably have to pull the valve cover back off. Make sure there's nothing that's preventing the gasket from making a good seal, like a cut or a crack in it, or something stuck up underneath it making it not get a good seal. So start this thing up, make sure it's going good. So far everything looks good, but like I said, we'll keep an eye on it over the next couple of weeks just to make sure. But always check with a good flashlight, get in those dark spots, and yeah, hope this was helpful, guys.